I'm going to do today is really just touch on some of the different things we can do in Excel with an SMI-based report. And so I've got Sage Intelligence up on my screen. We've got Report Manager. In here, I've created a dashboard report that's sitting in my test folder. So since I'm going to be using the Report Designer add-in, at this point, all I have to just do is run a report by clicking the green button, and we are off and away getting information from Mass directly into Excel. Once we have our report in Excel up, I'll certainly kind of give you a summary of what we're going to be doing. So in Excel, I've got several tabs for our report. I've got a chart of accounts. I've got tabs that we're going to be building data on. One tab, which is an income statement, 12-month trend, and another is an income statement year-over-year report. And then finally, we're going to see how those numbers populate a dashboard that I created, which will essentially have income statement, balance sheet, a top 10 expenses with a couple of graphs. So you'll see how we pull information fairly quickly from Mass and how we can create, fairly flexible reports using Sage Intelligence. So I've got a accounts tab because this is very helpful when starting a report because we will be reports from scratch in Excel. So it certainly helps, just the time it takes for us to start populating a report. So at this point, with Sage Intelligence, with the Report Designer add-in, to the right we have several categories. We have lists, formulas, and trees if we have multiple companies. In this case, our list gives us different lists that are found in the GL. So in this case, we have main accounts, we have accounts, we also have budget codes, right? Account categories, groups, account types. For the most part, usually when I'm starting reports, I'll usually pull over the main accounts or the accounts. So I'm going to click and drag this over here, and you'll see that we have all of our account numbers ready to go. And so if I were using this as a basis for designing a report, I would pull it over, and then I would start pulling apart. If this were an income statement, I would delete all of my balance sheet accounts, and I'll start adding some titles. Okay? So I'll certainly use this as a basis for my report. And that's good. I have actually a trended report and a year-over-year increment. And as you can see, essentially the next in designing a report is really getting the skeleton of the report before I start pulling information. So you'll notice when I start a report in Sage Intelligence, I always have my year and period up top because you'll see that we can use these as parameters for our reports. And in this case, I've created a 12-month trended report, and you'll see my years and my periods in rows 10 and 11. And normally with a trended report, what I like to do is have my year and period all the way to the end, so that if I change this from 2009 to 2010, you'll see how cells N10 and N11 are essentially formulas looking back at cells C3 and 4. And now these are also dynamically driven so that as I change my period to period 9, my columns also change dynamically. Now, one thing I've also mentioned in a prior webcast is a good way to have this as a dynamic cell so that it knows when you move from period 1 back to period 12, you see how I have essentially a formula that says if the cell immediately to the right is a 1, then I'm going to make this a 12. If not, then I'm going to look at the cell to the right, and I'm going to subtract 1. Likewise, for my year, I'm going to say essentially if this period is 12, then I'm going to take the cell immediately to the right, and I'm going to subtract 1. If not, then I'm going to take the cell immediately to the right. So what that allows me to do is essentially quickly populate my columns so that they're dynamically driven. So I can change this to 2009 period 8, and all of my columns are correct. So step 1, again, is really getting the format of your report. And in this case, I've got a really net sales, cost of sales, gross margin, margin percent, expenses, and net income and loss. And then I just have to the bottom essentially an expense report statement. You'll see in a minute how we're going to be using these account numbers in our report. So it's important to have a column. In the old FRX days, it would be similar in your row layout to put these numbers in your GeoLink. One other thing that I'll certainly mention is if you don't want these guys to essentially be displayed in your report, there's some nifty things we can do in Excel. If I highlight these cells and I right-click and I hit Format, and I go to my Custom tab and I use 3 semicolons and I hit OK, you'll notice how my formulas are no longer displayed. And let me clean this up. Now they're no longer displayed, but they're still active. So I could still change this to 2010 period 6. And you'll notice how everything is dynamically driven without me showing the formulas that are still embedded within those cells. Now, another way that I've also described how to do this, multiple ways. You could certainly come over here, and you can choose to essentially make your white so that it's transparent to your user, but the information is still there. Okay. Next, we're going to look at actually populating our information. Now, one thing you'll notice here, I have net sales, cost of sales, gross margin. Gross margin is a formula. And then we have margin, which is essentially C15 divided by C13. And sometimes you may not like, these division error signs in your report. And so what I like to do to clear this up, and there's a couple of ways you can do this, is I use a formula called if error. So if essentially this formula is an error, and I can choose to either display a blank. If I do that, it shows up as blank. I can choose to say, go ahead and show this as a 0. And it'll show it as 0. So using the if error sign certainly will help your reports just display cleaner for your users. In this case, I'm going to keep the 0 instead of the blank. You'll see I essentially use my flag of that cell to auto-populate the other cells. So now we're going to start populating this information. So this is where Sage Intelligence becomes powerful, because we can go to our formulas listing. And in this case, we're using our actual. We're going to click and drag that over here. You'll notice that there's a formula. So to populate this information, we're going to click on our insert function, and we're going to start populating the required fields. So our GeoLink is going to be cell A13. Our year, and now I hit it, but it's essentially cell C10. And period is going to be C11. Now this is great. I'm going to hit OK. A couple of other things. You'll notice my net sales show up as a credit balance. So it's Sage Intelligence, and that's because Mass essentially, keeps our revenues as a normal credit balance. So what we need to do for these types of normal balance fields, we essentially put a negative in front of it to reverse the sign. Now take a look at what happens if I wanted to click and drag this to auto-populate my other periods. I got a pound value. It didn't like what I did, and that's because my formulas essentially were not anchored. So I was looking at, in this case, my GeoLink was looking at cell B13, which is not a good Geo account number. So what you want to do when you're setting up your first cell is look to, so in this case, my GeoLink is always going to be in column A. So I'm going to put a $ in front of column, in front of the A. I'm going to let my 13 be variable. In this case, my year is always going to be row 10. So I'm going to anchor the 10. For period, same thing. I'm going to anchor row 11. I'm going to let column C be a floating column. So now I can do two things. I can go ahead and pull this up, and I can take this information and drag it down. Now in this case, you'll notice for net sales, we reversed the sign. Well, cost of sales, don't necessarily want to do that. And we're going to go ahead and drag that over. So now I have a dynamic report that I changed to 2009, period 11. Okay, in this case, I started the ABC company in period 2009, so I don't have anything in 2008, period 12. I'm going to take my cost of goods sold, and I'm going to cut that down. And now I have all the fields needed for a 12-trended income statement. I have net income, I have net loss for the first couple of months of 2009. After that, ABC company starts making money. You can see how easy it is to populate one cell and essentially click and drag that over. In fact, I'm going to take my cost of goods sold cell, and I'm going to paste it. And let's go ahead and do, let's make sure we have all our fields populated. So here, we're taking a look at our account number 500 for 2009, period 1. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to drag it. And you can see how quickly and easily I've populated 12 periods of. So this is taking monthly actuals into account. Now, I also want to find out this table year-to-date numbers. So there is a formula, actual year-to-date. I'm going to click and drag it here. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'll go ahead and pull my GL link, my period, and there we go. And I'll do the same thing. I'll anchor my A. In this case, you also notice there's an area for company. If you have multiple companies, we can have company as a parameter. And Sage Intelligence will know what company's data you're looking for. And since this is a revenue account, we'll go ahead and populate that. I'll go ahead and copy this over here. And now I have a year-to-date income statement if I was interested in that. So in this case, we're going to take this, and I'm going to populate that cell. Now in Excel, you'll notice if you wanted to auto-populate all the contents in that column, you can just grab that little plus sign on the right-hand corner and double-click it. And it auto-fills essentially the rest of it up until the last area that's populated in the column adjacent to it. So very easy. In a matter of a couple of minutes, we've created essentially a income statement as well as maybe a trended expense report. The key is always getting your report really formatted the way you want it first, really set it up properly, okay? And after that, then it's easy to just create a formula and start dragging it across. It's a very flexible report. We're now going to look at our year comparison. In this case, what I've done is I've done something similar to my monthly trended report, okay, where I'm looking back a period at a time. In this case, I'm just looking back a year at a time. So I build my report looking at the year and the period. However, my year-to-year comparison is only looking at the year. My period essentially looks at the same period as the year that I'm running in. So here we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bring over, in this case I'm going to make it actual. I could do year-to-date comparisons. We'll do this. There we go. And we'll go ahead and start bringing it over. I have to bring it down for my expenses. And now I can take these guys and copy and paste them. And I am set. Now I'll take this cell and I can copy and paste. I can now drag it over and drag it down. And I now have, in a matter of minutes, a flexible summarized income statement and expense report that I can change my parameters again. And there we go. I can always change. I don't like having error signs, so I'm going to change this to be, instead of zeros, I'll leave it blank. So with the ABC company, we don't have data going across multiple years. So I believe we have 2010 period 1 or 2. So at least we have something we can populate. Okay, so this is just a couple of variations of reports that we can create. And now we're actually going to see how we can use this information to populate a dashboard. Now in this case, I've created a dashboard, and I'll show you a couple of ways we can pull information. Because if you'll notice, this income statement year over year is looking back at our tab year over year data. And it's essentially looking back at cells and dividing it by 1,000. So that I get nice smaller numbers as opposed to 293,600 plus. So essentially, I can create this once, look back at the cells that are on my other tabs, and essentially I have now a dynamic report. Same thing for my income statement. This is looking at my trend data tab and auto-populating it for me. My balance sheet, I did something different. You'd notice that I don't necessarily have a balance sheet in one of these two tabs. So rather than creating the data for my dashboard, I essentially have the information I need within my dashboard itself. So in this case, I have a balance sheet looking at my current assets, fixed assets, current liabilities, equity, and you'll notice that if I look at my chart of account, now granted I went ahead and deleted my balance sheet accounts there, but essentially once I populate my my account numbers, my ranges, I can use my formula, my GL actual year-to-date formula, to look now at cell E10 to essentially find the accounts that I'm using. And then I also do reference here. I'm looking at cell C and 4 to essentially pull the year and period that I'm running it for. But you can see that I can keep everything I need for one of my dashboard fields all within this one tab without having to reference another tab. And this I can use my formula with the semicolons, or I can simply format this up white so that the user doesn't notice that it's there. And the graphs I have are simple graphs like revenue, gross profit, gross margin, net income 12 months. These are dynamic graphs so that as my information here changes, so next month, I go to look at 2010, period 1, and then look at 2010, period 1. My information essentially gets updated. Okay? Very flexible now that we're reporting in Excel. Another thing I'd like to show you is how do we create a top 10 listing in Excel. And we'll be using a couple of formulas here in our dashboard. And the first formula, we'll actually start this from scratch. First formula that we'll use is essentially a large formula. So what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to type in equals large. In this case, I'm looking at my top 10 year-to-date expenses. So I'm going to go into my data tab. I'm going to be going to expenses listing. I'm going to highlight all of my expenses. I'm going to anchor this by typing in effort. L4, you'll notice, goes ahead and anchors the row and the column, puts dollar signs. And now I'm going to say, show me the largest number 1. Now, it gave me it gave me a number. In this case, 2,000 was the largest number in my list. In this case, it was driver payroll. Now, essentially, to find the next largest list, or the next largest expense, I can essentially drag this down, and I see what happens when I drag it down. 2 things. It picks up the formatting of the cell, so I'll probably have to clean that up. At the same time, actually giving me the largest expense in my list again. So I can choose to do number 2 here. I could do a couple of things as well. I can essentially undo this. I can either put somewhere around here something like that. And instead of making this the largest, I can simply point it out. Make E anchored. And now I can simply copy this. And if I do copy, paste special, and I do formulas, I'm good to go. I now have the top 10 largest expenses year to date. And here's the tricky part. For those of you who are used to using VLOOKUPs, my first thought here would be, okay, if I want to get the description for these accounts, it would be great if I can do a VLOOKUP to say, for $35,998.27, what was the description of that expense account? Well, the problem is when I go into my trend data tab, if you know, VLOOKUPs can only look to the right, can't look to the left. And that's essentially where I need to go. Okay? So VLOOKUPs in this case work. There is another way you can essentially accomplish going to the left, and it would be nice if VLOOKUPs allowed you to go into the negative, but it won't. So in this case, we're going to use a combination of actually a match function in Excel and an index function. Okay? So let's do the first one, a match function. And we'll go ahead and I'll kind of show you what it looks like. What match allows us to do is say equals match, point to the cell, C28, and then go to your array, which is our expense distribution table, and I want you to find the exact match. So in this case, what it's doing is it's saying, go ahead and see where 35,998.27 is in our array, which is column O, and I want you to tell me what position is it. And if we unhide this, we'll see that 35,998.27 is actually position number 18. So if we down the row, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 6, let's see, 023 to 083. 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. So it's in the 18th position. Okay? And if we go down the list here, we'll have to see why. We have an NA here. 19,900 should be our third largest. which it is. And the reason it's coming out with an NA is because instead of 73, I should have made it row 77. So let's go ahead and make that change. And now, these are our positions where our expenses lie. So that's using our match function. Now what we're going to do is use our index function, which is going to allow us to actually go into the chart itself and go backwards and say wherever 35.9 is, I'm going to go backwards. So in this case, we're going to use an index function. Okay, and we're going to do equals index. We're going to point to our column here. And I'm going to go as far back as I need to. Okay, I'm going to anchor them both. So again, F4. So now I've chosen my array. Now what I want to do is I want to say, what row am I looking for? Well, out of this array, I'm looking for my 18th row. So now it knows to actually, go to row 18. And now I want to say, what column in my array, columns B through O, do I want to find? In this case, I'm going to put my first column. And there we go. We now have essentially the description that matches the top expense. And if we look at 35.998, and we look at the description, it's driver payroll. And now we can take this information, and I could click and drag it, but again, I click and drag it and eliminate those lines. I could copy it and insert any special formulas. Now you see I have a very flexible list. Top 10 expenses using essentially match and index. So it's another alternative, probably a better alternative to VLOOKUPs that allows you to go backwards in digging into and looking up your list or array. One other thing I just encountered this week with another client, we're talking about how some reports, wouldn't it be great if we can hide this information? And there's a couple of ways you can do that as well in Excel. I'm thinking one way, we could certainly come over here. We'll enter a column, and we're going to put a formula. And so we're going to say equals if this plus this equals 0, then hide, else show. So essentially you could see that we're essentially creating a formula here that looks at these cells, and essentially if the two net out to this, then it's going to hide it. If not, then it'll show it. Now this is one way you can do this. I'm not sure if this is the best approach, because what happens if you have 1 year where it's negative 500, the next year is positive 500, and then you're essentially hiding it. Well, you probably don't want to hide that, that row. Another approach you can take is essentially using another function called absolute. That's going to actually take the absolute value of cell B23 plus the absolute value of cell E23, and if the absolute value of both equals 0, then we'll go ahead and hide it. Probably a little, I can see where if we don't use the absolute, we may run into some issues. So the great thing here is now we can come over here. If we go to data and we filter, notice that we have filters, and we can choose to only show our shows. And now we're able to at least hide those rows that do not have a balance. Now there's also, some other variations of this allow you to adjust formulas in case there's, rows and that you do still want to show, but yet those values are 0. But this is one way you can essentially build a formula here and essentially have the filter set. So certainly, this demonstration really goes into the heart of really doing things in Excel when designing reports. Now, of course, when you're done with designing a report in Sage Intelligence, what you want to do is essentially go to your report and you want to create and link template. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit OK, and essentially I'm going to replace my template so that the next time I come in and I run my report, all of the changes that I've made are essentially saved, and my report is ready to be run for the next period. So again, you'll notice, with Sage Intelligence, while there is a second level of interface for running reports, when it comes to designing, you're pretty much designing in Excel. Great. Well, I think that concludes today's demonstration with Sage Intelligence. I can certainly make this template available. There are also some templates available. Sage Intelligence has a forum, a community. If you go out to community.alchemex.com, there's a community that you can sign up, and there's some free report samples and some really just a lot of information that can help you get started on designing reports, and also some great tips on some formulas and functions within Excel, because the more you know the functions in Excel, the more powerful of a designer you can be.